The woman appeared at sunset, stumbling through the gate of the Double R Ranch like something out of a fever dream. Jake Rollins saw her from the barn, where he'd been checking on a mare about to foal. At first, he thought she might be drunk or lost. The way she moved with that uncertain gait, one hand pressed against her side. But as she got closer, he saw the fear in her eyes, raw and real as the dust on her torn dress. "Please," she called out, her voice breaking. "I need help. I need you to save me." Jake set down the bucket he'd been carrying and walked toward her, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was a big man, weathered by 40 years of Montana sun and hard work, with hands that could gentle a spooked horse or mend a fence post with equal ease. He'd seen plenty of strange things in his time, but something about this woman made his instincts go sharp. She couldn't have been more than 30, with dark hair that might have been pretty if it wasn't tangled with bits of sagebrush. Her clothes looked expensive once, the kind city folk wore when they wanted to play at being country. But they were ruined now, stained with dirt and what might have been blood. "Ma'am, you hurt?" Jake asked, keeping his voice steady and calm. "Not yet," she said, and that strange answer made him pause. "But I will be if you don't help me. Please, I know this sounds crazy, but I need you to save me." 3 times a day. Jake frowned. 3 times a day? 3 times. She swayed on her feet and he reached out to steady her. Morning, noon, and night. For 7 days. That's all I need. 7 days, and then I'll be free. Free from what? Jake asked, but she was already collapsing against him, her weight slight as a child's despite her height. He caught her easily, lifting her without effort, and carried her toward the ranch house. Behind him, the sun dipped below the mountains, throwing long shadows across the valley. His foreman, Tommy Yazzie, came out of the bunkhouse, concern written across his weathered crow face. "Boss, everything okay?" "Get Doc Morrison on the radio," Jake called back. "And keep your eyes open tonight. We might have trouble." Inside the house, Jake laid the woman on the worn leather sofa his grandmother had brought west in a covered wagon. The house was simple but clean, a bachelor's home with none of the softness a woman might have added. He grabbed a blanket and tucked it around her, then fetched water from the kitchen. She came around when he pressed the glass to her lips. Her eyes green as new, grass focused on his face with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "You didn't call the police," she said. "It wasn't a question. Should I have?" "No," she struggled to sit up. "Please, no police. They can't help me anyway. Nobody can accept." She looked around the room, taking in the rifle mounted over the fireplace, the shelves lined with books about ranching and animal husbandry, the faded photographs of his family. "Except someone strong enough. Someone who knows how to fight." "Fight what?" Jake pulled up a chair, turning it backward and straddling it the way he'd done since he was a boy. "Lady, you're not making a lick of sense. My name is Carolyn." She took a long drink of water. "Carolyn Mitchell. And I'm being hunted." The word hung in the air between them. Outside, a coyote howled in the distance, and Jake heard Tommy's boots on the porch, standing guard like Jake had taught him. Hunted by who? "My husband." Caroline's hands trembled as she set down the glass. "Ex-husband, I should say. The divorce was finalized 2 months ago, but Victor doesn't believe in letting go of what he considers his property. He's been following me for weeks. Every time I try to hide, he finds me. Every time I run, he catches up, so why not go to the police?" "Get a restraining order?" Carolyn laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Victor is the police. Not just a cop, the chief of police in Riverside County. He has friends everywhere. Judges, sheriffs, state troopers. The last time I tried to file a report, the officer who took my statement called Victor before I even left the station." Jake studied her face, looking for signs of deception. He'd learned to read people the same way he read horses, by the set of their shoulders, the honesty in their eyes. Carolyn Mitchell was scared, but she wasn't lying. "Why 3 times a day?" he asked finally, because that's when he comes. Carolyn pulled the blanket tighter around herself. "Morning, noon, and night. Like clockwork. He's trained himself somehow, or maybe he's just that obsessed." But every 8 hours he shows up wherever I am. I've tested it, tracked it. It never fails. And each time I have to be somewhere he can't reach me, or— She touched her side where Jake had seen her hand before. Or he'll finish what he started. What he started? She pulled up her shirt just enough to show a scar, fresh and angry, running along her ribcage. 3 weeks ago, I wasn't fast enough. The doctor said another inch and he would have hit my liver. I told them I fell on some farm equipment. Jake felt anger kindle in his chest, the kind of slow-burning rage that had gotten him in trouble in his younger days. He'd been raised by his grandmother after his own father had laid hands on his mother one too many times. The old woman had taught him that a real man protected those who couldn't protect themselves, especially women and children and animals who had no voice. And you think I can stop him? One rancher against a police chief with connections? I think you're isolated out here. I think your ranch is defensible. And I think— Carolyn looked at him with those green eyes, and he saw something in them that reminded him of every broken creature he'd ever nursed back to health. I think you're the kind of man who won't turn away someone who needs help. Am I wrong? Jake stood up and walked to the window. In the gathering darkness, he could see the lights of the barn, the shadowy shapes of cattle in the near pasture, the mountains rising like ancient guardians around his land. This ranch had been in his family for 4 generations. He'd fought to keep it through drought and debt, through his father's drinking and his own mistakes. It was more than property. It was legacy, sanctuary, home. And now this stranger wanted to bring danger to his door. Tommy knocked softly and opened the door. Doc Morrison says he'll be here in 20 minutes. And boss, there's a car coming up the access road? Headlights off. Jake turned back to Carolyn and saw the color drain from her face. She checked her watch with shaking hands. 8 hours, she whispered. Right on schedule. Jake made his decision in the space of a heartbeat, the way he'd made every important decision in his life with his gut instead of his head. He grabbed the rifle from over the fireplace and checked the chamber. Tommy, get the floodlights ready. Miss Mitchell, you stay here and don't come out no matter what you hear. He headed for the door, then paused. And Carolyn? I'm not in the habit of letting bullies win. Not on my land? As he stepped out into the night, Jake Rollins had no idea he'd just agreed to the fight of his life, one that would test every ounce of strength he had and push him to the very edge of his endurance. But he was a rancher, and ranchers didn't give up. Not on their land, not on their principles, and not on people who needed saving. Even if it killed him, the car rolled to a stop about 50 yards from the house, headlights still dark. Jake positioned himself on the porch, rifle held loose but ready, while Tommy moved to cover the side approach. The floodlights blazed to life, turning night into harsh white day. Nothing happened for a long minute. Then the driver's door opened, and a man stepped out. Victor Mitchell looked exactly like what he was, a man used to authority and the fear it commanded. Tall and fit, with silver threads in his dark hair and the kind of sharp-pressed uniform that spoke of vanity as much as discipline. He wore his badge and gun like they were parts of his body, natural as breathing. When he smiled, it didn't reach his eyes. Evening, Victor called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. I'm looking for my wife. I have reason to believe she's here. Ex-wife, from what I understand, Jake replied. And this is private property. You got a warrant? Don't need one for a welfare check. Victor took a step forward, and Jake heard the subtle click of Tommy chambering around in the darkness. Victor heard it too and stopped. I'm concerned about Caroline's mental state. She's been having episodes. Delusions, paranoia. Her therapist agreed she might be a danger to herself. That's so? Jake shifted his stance slightly. Funny thing is, she seems pretty clear-headed to me. And even if she wasn't, she's got every right to be somewhere safe where folks aren't hunting her down every 8 hours. The smile dropped from Victor's face. She told you that story? About me tracking her? Did she also mention she's off her medication? That she tried to attack me with a kitchen knife? She mentioned the scar you gave her, Jake said flatly. That's enough for me. Listen, friend. Victor's tone changed, becoming reasonable and dangerous all at once. I don't know who you are, but this is a domestic situation. You don't want to get involved in something you don't understand. Carolyn is sick. She needs help I can provide. The only help she needs is being away from you. Jake raised the rifle just enough to make his meaning clear. So here's how this is going to work. You're going to get back in that car, drive off my property, and not come back. And if I see you or anyone you send around here again, I'll exercise my rights as a property owner to defend my land and guests. We clear? Victor's jaw tightened. For a moment, Jake thought the man might go for his service weapon, and his finger moved closer to the trigger. But Victor had survived this long by knowing when to push and when to wait. He raised his hand slowly in a gesture of peace that fooled nobody. I can see you're determined to be difficult, Victor said. That's fine. But you should know that obstructing an officer in the performance of his duties is a crime. So is harboring a fugitive. She's not a fugitive. No warrants, no charges. I checked with my lawyer already. Jake hadn't, but he would as soon as the sun came up. Now get? Victor stared at him for another long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll be back in 8 hours. With proper paperwork. And then we'll see how tough you are. Rancher? He climbed back into his car, started the engine, and turned around with deliberate slowness, his taillights painting the night red as he drove away. Tommy emerged from the shadows. That man's trouble, boss. The kind that doesn't give up? I know it, Jake said. He felt the adrenaline draining from his system, leaving him tired. Get on the radio to Sheriff Connors in town. Let him know what's happening. Maybe he can run interference, jurisdiction being what it is. Inside, Carolyn was standing by the window, her face pale but composed. Thank you, she said quietly. Most people would have just handed me over. Most people didn't grow up watching their mother flinch every time someone raised their voice, Jake replied. He set the rifle back in its rack. But that man's not going to quit. You understand that? This thing you're asking me to do, saving you 3 times a day for 7 days, it's going to get harder before it gets easier. I know. Carolyn wrapped her arms around herself. But it's only 7 days. I have a lawyer, a good one, working on getting proper protection orders that can't be ignored. She says she needs a week to navigate the system, file in the right courts, get judges who aren't in Victor's pocket. If I can just stay alive and free for 7 days, I'll have legal protection that even he can't circumvent. Doc Morrison arrived 20 minutes later, a grizzled man in his 60s who'd been patching up ranch hands and livestock for longer than Jake had been alive. He examined Carolyn with gentle efficiency, checked her vitals, and gave her something to help her sleep. She's exhausted, he told Jake quietly in the kitchen. Running on nerves and fear. Whatever you're planning to do, make sure she gets rest between whatever this is. I will, Jake promised. The doctor left. And Jake made up the spare bedroom for Carolyn while Tommy settled in to take first watch. The ranch had 3 hens total, but the other 2 were out moving cattle to higher pasture and wouldn't be back for days. It would be just him and Tommy, facing down whatever Victor Mitchell threw at them. Jake didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about Caroline's words 3 times a day for 7 days. That was 21 confrontations. 21 times he'd have to face down a dangerous man with nothing but his wits, his will, and the law of his own land. At dawn, he found Carolyn in the kitchen, making coffee with the practiced ease of someone who'd cooked in strange kitchens before. She'd borrowed one of his old shirts and a pair of jeans that needed rolling up. With her hair pulled back and her face scrubbed clean, she looked younger and more vulnerable. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. Kept waiting for him to come back early, even though he never does. His schedule is like a religious observance. Sick, isn't it? Plenty of sick things in the world, Jake said. He poured himself coffee and leaned against the counter. Tell me about him. If I'm going to do this, I need to understand what I'm up against. Carolyn was quiet for a moment, staring into her mug. Victor wasn't always like this. When we met, he was charming, protective. I thought I'd found someone strong, you know? Someone who could take care of things. My father had died and I was lost, and Victor seemed like solid ground. She laughed bitterly. Turns out solid ground can be a prison if you can't leave it. When did it change? Gradually. Little things, first checking my phone, asking where I'd been, who I'd talked to. I told myself it was just because he loved me. Then it was telling me what to wear, what friends I could see. Then it was grabbing my arm too hard when I disagreed with him. Then worse. She touched her side. The final straw was when he told me he'd been tracking my car with a GPS device. That he had cameras in our house I didn't know about. That he owned me, body and soul, and the sooner I accepted it, the easier my life would be. So you ran. So I ran. Filed for divorce, threw a lawyer 3 states away, left everything behind. Thought if I could just get far enough, fast enough, he'd give up. But Victor doesn't give up. It's like I broke the rules of his world, and he won't rest until I'm punished for it. Jake heard the pain in her voice and recognized it. His own mother had sounded like that in the years before she finally found the strength to leave. By then, the damage had been done to her, to Jake, to the whole family. You did the right thing, he said firmly. Don't ever doubt that. Even if it gets you hurt? Carolyn looked at him with those green eyes. He meant what he said, Jake. He'll come back with paperwork or without it. He'll bring pressure from every angle. And if that doesn't work, ... She left the sentence unfinished. Then we'll deal with it when it comes, Jake said. They spent the morning preparing. Jake called his lawyer in town. A sharp woman named Rita Gonzalez, who'd helped him navigate water rights disputes and boundary disagreements. She listened to his explanation, asked pointed questions, and promised to start building a legal defense immediately. Keep records of everything, she advised. Every time he shows up, document it. Time, date, what he said, what he did. And Jake, be careful. Men like this don't play fair. Tommy reinforced the approaches to the house, setting up tripwires that would ring bells if someone tried to sneak up in the dark. They moved supplies into the house, food, water, ammunition in case things got prolonged. Jake called his other 2 hands and told them to stay out at the line camp until further notice. No sense exposing more people to danger. At noon, right on schedule, Victor returned. This time he wasn't alone. He brought 2 deputies, both young men who looked uncomfortable but determined. They parked at the property line, and Victor climbed out holding a folder of papers. I have a court order, he called out. Signed by Judge Hamilton. It requires Carolyn Mitchell to undergo a psychiatric evaluation. You're obligated to produce her. Jake had Rita on speakerphone in his shirt pocket. What county? She called out. Victor's eyes narrowed. Who's that? My lawyer. What county issued that order? Riverside County. This is Montana, Rita's voice came through clear and strong. Your Riverside County court has no jurisdiction here. That order is worth less than the paper it's printed on. Tell your client to try again with the right paperwork. One of the deputies shifted uncomfortably. The other whispered something to Victor, who looked like he'd tasted something sour. This is obstruction, Victor said. But his voice had lost some of its certainty. This is property rights, Jake replied. And unless you've got Montana paper signed by a Montana judge, you and your friends need to clear out. The standoff lasted another 10 minutes. Victor trying different angles, Rita batting them down with legal precision. Finally, the deputies convinced Victor to leave, probably worried about crossing state lines with questionable authority. As they drove away, Carolyn appeared beside Jake on the porch. 2 down, she said quietly. 19 to go. Jake realized she was counting every confrontation, marking them off like a prisoner marking days on a cell wall. 7 days suddenly seemed like a very long time. By the 3rd day, Jake understood that Victor Mitchell was playing a longer game than simple confrontation. The man was patient, methodical, and willing to use every tool in his considerable arsenal. The morning visit on day 3 brought not Victor himself, but a social worker from Montana Child Protective Services, accompanied by a sheriff's deputy Jake didn't know. The woman, thin and serious with a clipboard clutched like a shield, explained that they'd received reports of dangerous conditions at the ranch, unsecured firearms, illegal harboring of a mentally unstable individual, potential violence. Jake let them inspect the place while Rita fired off calls to their supervisors. The firearms were all properly stored. Carolyn was clearly coherent and unharmed, and there was nothing illegal happening. But it ate up 2 hours of everyone's time and left Jake tired and frustrated. "He's trying to exhaust you," Carolyn said as they watched the officials drive away. She'd been hiding in the barn during the inspection, as Rita had advised. "That's his strategy now. If he can't take me by force, he'll wear you down until you're too tired to fight." She was right. The noon visit brought a fire inspector responding to an anonymous report of code violations. The evening visit was Victor himself, polite and cold, serving papers for a civil suit claiming Jake had kidnapped Carolyn and was holding her against her will. "More legal nonsense," Rita assured him over the phone. "But you'll have to appear in court in 3 weeks to answer it. He's trying to create a paper trail, make you look like the aggressor?" Jake went to bed that night feeling like he'd fought a battle without throwing a punch. His body was fine, but his mind was exhausted from the constant vigilance, the paperwork, the circular arguments with officials who were just doing their jobs. He woke at 2 in the morning to Tommy shaking his shoulder. "Boss, we got trouble." "Real trouble?" Jake pulled on his boots and followed Tommy outside. In the distance, orange light flickered against the sky. The hay barn 3 tons of winter feed stored for the cattle was burning. "Called the fire department," Tommy said as they ran. "But they're 20 minutes out." They fought the fire with hoses and buckets, trying to save what they could, but the hay went up like tinder. By the time the volunteer firefighters arrived, there was nothing left but charred timber and ash. The fire chief, a man named Porter who'd grown up 3 ranches over, walked the perimeter with a grim expression. "Accelerant," he said, pointing to scorch patterns. "Someone started this deliberately. I'll file a report, but Jake, this is arson. You need to call the police." "I know who did it," Jake said flatly. He looked toward the house where Carolyn was watching from a window, her face ghostly pale. "But I can't prove it." The next morning, Victor didn't come at 8 o'clock. Instead, at 7:30, Jake got a call from his bank. There was a problem with his accounts. They'd been frozen pending an investigation into possible fraud. Then his feed supplier called to cancel their standing order, something about unpaid bills Jake knew he'd settled months ago. Then the irrigation company, the vet service, the grain store. "He's attacking your business," Rita said when Jake called her, his voice shaking with fury. "Going after your reputation, your credit, your suppliers? This is economic warfare. Can you stop it?" "I can try." "But Jake, this is going to cost money. Legal fees, court costs, and it's going to take time. More than 7 days." Jake looked around his ranch at the smoking ruins of his barn, at the cattle that would need feeding through the winter, at the land his family had worked for generations. Victor Mitchell was trying to destroy everything Jake had built, and he was doing it with phone calls and paperwork. Weapons Jake couldn't fight with a rifle. Carolyn found him in the house that afternoon, sitting at his desk surrounded by bills and legal documents. She didn't say anything, just sat down across from him. "I should leave," she finally said. "This isn't fair to you. I asked you to save me, not to lose everything." "You're not going anywhere," Jake said. "And I'm not losing anything." "Not to him?" "Jake, look at what he's done in 3 days. You've lost your hay, your credit is ruined, your business relationships are damaged. What happens in 4 more days? What happens after I leave and he keeps coming after you? Then I'll fight him then too." Jake stood up and walked to the window. Outside, Tommy was working with 2 neighbors who'd come to help clear the barn debris. Good people who knew Jake's character and didn't believe whatever lies Victor was spreading. "My grandmother used to say that the measure of a man isn't in what he owns, but in what he stands for. I'm standing for the idea that bullies don't get to win just because they've got power and connections. I'm standing for the idea that someone who asks for help deserves to get it. And I'm standing for you, Carolyn, because you had the courage to run when it would have been easier to stay." Carolyn stood up and walked to him, putting a hand on his arm. It was the first time she'd touched him beyond that first night, and Jake felt the warmth of it through his shirt. "Why?" she asked quietly. "You don't know me? I'm nothing to you." "My father used to beat my mother," Jake said, the words coming out rough and hard. Every Saturday night when he'd been drinking, he'd come home and find some reason to lay hands on her. I was too young to stop it, too small. I used to hide in my room and pray to God to make it stop. Finally, when I was 14, I got big enough to stand between them. Broke his nose and 3 of his ribs. He never touched her again, but by then she was broken in ways that don't heal. He turned to look at Carolyn. She killed herself when I was 17. Left a note saying she was tired of being afraid, and I swore then that if I ever had the chance to help someone who was running from the same thing, I'd do it. No matter what it cost. Caroline's eyes filled with tears. I'm so sorry. Don't be sorry. Just survive. That's all I'm asking. Survive the next 4 days, and then you'll be free. The noon visit came with Victor and a television news crew. The reporter, a young woman with carefully styled hair and a microphone, tried to interview Jake about the hostage situation at his ranch. Tommy chased them off with a warning about trespassing, but Jake knew the damage was done. That night, the local news ran a story about a controversial standoff at a remote Montana ranch, with carefully edited footage that made Jake look dangerous and unreasonable. His phone rang all evening, friends checking in. Neighbors offering support, but also strangers calling him names, accusing him of crimes he hadn't committed. He unplugged the landline and turned off his cell phone. At midnight. Someone shot out the windows of his truck. At 4 a.m. Someone cut his fence line and ran off 24 head of cattle. At dawn on the 4th day. Jake looked at himself in the mirror and barely recognized the man staring back. He hadn't slept properly in days. His eyes were bloodshot, his face drawn. He'd lost weight he couldn't afford to lose. His hands trembled slightly when he tried to pour coffee. You need rest, Carolyn said. She'd been sleeping better. Ironically, the constant activity kept her mind off the fear. Real rest, not just a few hours here and there. Can't rest, Jake said. He's coming at 8, so let Tommy handle it. You taught him how to stand watch. Trust him. Jake wanted to argue, but he was too tired. He nodded and stumbled to his bedroom, falling onto the mattress fully clothed. Sleep took him immediately, pulling him down into dark, dreamless depths. He woke to shouting that Jake bolted upright, his heart hammering. The clock said 2 in the afternoon. He'd slept through the morning visit and halfway to the noon one. The shouting was coming from outside, angry male voices punctuated by Tommy's calmer tones. Jake grabbed his rifle and ran outside to find 3 men he didn't recognize squared off against Tommy in the yard. They were ranch hands by the look of them, locals hired for the day and spoiling for a fight. You the son of a bitch hiding that crazy woman? One of them said when he saw Jake. We got paid good money to bring her in. By who? Jake asked, though he already knew. Man from Riverside County? Said she was wanted on a psych hold. Sighed there'd be $1,000 for whoever brought her in. Jake's vision narrowed. Victor had put a bounty on Caroline's head, turned her into prey for anyone desperate or greedy enough to try. These men didn't know the full story, they just saw easy money. She's not wanted, Jake said carefully. You've been lied to. Now get off my property before this gets ugly. $1,000 says different, another man said. And Jake saw him reaching for something at his belt, a taser. Illegal to carry, but common enough in ranch country. Tommy moved first, stepping between Jake and the men with his own rifle raised. You boys need to think hard about your next move, he said quietly. Because this goes sideways and you're the ones going to jail, not us. For a long moment, nobody moved. Then one of the men, the oldest, with gray in his beard, spat in the dirt and shook his head. Ain't worth dying over, he muttered. Come on. They left, but Jake knew there would be others. Victor had opened a new front in his war, one that would bring desperate men with less sense than these 3. Carolyn was waiting inside, pale but composed. It's day 4, she said. 3 more days. Can you last 3 more days? Jake wanted to say yes. He wanted to be the strong man, the hero who could shoulder any burden. But his body was screaming at him, and his mind was foggy with exhaustion. The ranch was falling apart around him, His reputation was in tatters. And now he had to worry about bounty hunters on top of everything else? I don't know, he admitted. I honest to God don't know. The fifth day dawned gray and cold, with clouds hanging low over the mountains like a promise of snow. Jake had managed another few hours of sleep, but it wasn't enough. His body moved like it belonged to someone else, heavy and uncoordinated. Tommy brought him coffee and breakfast, but food sat like lead in his stomach. Maybe she should turn herself in, Tommy said quietly, glancing toward the house where Carolyn was still sleeping. Not to him, but to the state police. Get proper protection. She tried that, Jake reminded him. He's got connections everywhere. The moment she surfaces in any official capacity, he'll know where she is, and he'll find a way to get to her. So what's the alternative? You work yourself to death playing bodyguard? Jake didn't have an answer. He was saved from having to find one by the sound of vehicles approaching, not just one car, but three, forming a convoy that kicked up dust from the access road. Victor's escalation had reached a new level. He climbed out of the lead vehicle wearing full tactical gear, followed by 6 men dressed the same. They weren't deputies this time. They had the look of private security, the kind of hired muscle that didn't ask questions about legality. Jake Rawlins, Victor called out, his voice amplified by a megaphone. I have a warrant for Carolyn Mitchell's arrest, issued by Montana authorities. Failure to produce her will result in your arrest for obstruction of justice. Show me the warrant, Rita's voice came through Jake's phone speaker. She'd been on standby, waiting for this moment. One of the men approached and handed a document through the fence. Jake scanned it while Rita read it over the phone camera he'd set up. Her silence told him everything. It's real, she finally said. Signed by Judge Matthews and Helena. Someone got to him, convinced him Carolyn is a fugitive from a domestic violence charge that Victor filed yesterday. It's bullshit, but it's legal until I can get it overturned. How long will that take? Jake asked. 2 days minimum. Maybe 3. Jake's heart sank. They were on day 5 of 7. If he gave Carolyn up now, she'd be in Victor's custody or dead before Rita could do anything about it. But if he refused to honor a legitimate Montana warrant, he'd be breaking the law himself. What do I do? He asked. That's not a legal question, Rita said softly. That's a moral one. I can't advise you to break the law, Jake. Jake looked at the men arrayed outside his property. At Victor standing there with his smug confidence. At the ruins of his barn and the shattered windows of his truck. He thought about his mother, about the note she'd left, about 14-year-old Jake standing between his parents with his fists clenched. Knowing he was too late. Carolyn, he called toward the house. Stay inside and don't come out. To Victor. He said, You're not taking her, then I'm taking you. Victor gestured, and 4 of his men advanced toward the gate. What happened next unfolded with the strange slowness of violence. The men cut through the gate lock with bolt cutters and moved up the drive. Tommy stood with Jake. Both of them armed, but knowing they couldn't actually shoot, these men were following what they believed was a legal order. Stand down. One of the security men said, showing his credentials. We don't want anyone hurt. Neither do I, Jake replied. But you're not getting past this porch. They tried to go around him. Jake blocked them. They tried to physically move him. Jake, big and desperate, fought back. It wasn't clean or heroic, it was grappling and shoving, the sound of men grunting and cursing. Tommy waded in to help, and for a few wild minutes, it was just confusion and violence. Jake took a punch to the ribs that knocked the wind out of him. He returned it with an elbow that sent one man sprawling. Another came at him from behind, and Jake twisted, throwing him into the porch railing hard enough to crack the wood. His body was moving on instinct now, fueled by adrenaline and desperation and the last reserves of his strength, but there were too many of them. Eventually, they wrestled Jake to the ground, zip-tied his wrists, and dragged him toward one of the vehicles. Tommy was down too, bleeding from his nose, but still fighting until they secured him. Through it all, Carolyn stayed inside like Jake had told her to. He was grateful for that, at least. If they couldn't find her immediately, it would buy time. Victor walked up to Jake as they loaded him into a vehicle. "You should have just stepped aside," he said. "Now you're going to jail for assaulting peace officers, obstruction, maybe even kidnapping. Your ranch will be seized as evidence. Everything you built, gone. And for what? For a woman you barely know?" Jake spat blood and looked Victor in the eye. "Yeah," he said. "For that. They took him to the county jail in town, processed him like any other criminal. Fingerprints, mugshot, orange jumpsuit. The whole time, Jake's mind was racing. How long could Carolyn hide? Where would she go? Tommy was in a cell somewhere nearby, probably asking the same questions. Rita came to see him that evening. She looked tired and worried. "I've filed motions to get you released, but the earliest hearing is tomorrow morning." "Jake, this is bad. The charges are serious. What about Carolyn?" "They're still searching your property. So far she's managed to stay hidden, but it's only a matter of time." Rita leaned forward. "Jake, you need to tell them where she is. Not because Victor deserves to win, but because this is destroying your life. You'll lose the ranch, spend years in prison. Is it worth it?" Jake thought about his mother's note, about Caroline's scar, about every broken thing he tried to fix on this ranch and in his life. "Yes," he said simply. Rita shook her head but didn't argue. "Then I'll do everything I can." "But Jake, I'm not sure everything will be enough." The night in jail was endless. Jake lay on the thin mattress and listened to the sounds of other prisoners coughing, snoring, someone crying quietly in the dark. His body hurt everywhere, bruises blooming where he'd been hit and restrained. But worse than the physical pain was the knowledge that he'd failed. He'd promised to save Carolyn 3 times a day for 7 days, and he hadn't even made it to day 6. Morning brought no relief. The bail hearing was postponed some administrative issue, though Jake suspected Victor's influence was at work. Rita fought hard, but the system ground slowly. Another day in jail, another day of Carolyn alone and hiding. On the morning of day 6, a guard came to Jake's cell with an odd expression. "You got a visitor," he said. "Not your lawyer. Says it's urgent." They led him to a private meeting room, and Jake's heart nearly stopped. Carolyn sat at the table, looking small and exhausted, but determined. "What are you doing here?" Jake demanded. "You're supposed to be hiding." "I turned myself in," Carolyn said calmly. 2 hours ago. Walked right into the sheriff's office and told them where I was." "No," Jake felt panic rising in his chest. "No, Carolyn, you can't." "He'll have to go through proper channels now," Carolyn interrupted. "I'm in Montana custody, not his." And Rita's motions finally got to the right judge, Judge Peterson, who apparently can't stand Victor and has been looking for a reason to slap him down. "The kidnapping warrant is being withdrawn. The domestic violence charge is being investigated. You're being released." Jake stared at her. "I don't understand." "You collapsed, Jake," Carolyn said softly. "Not literally, but close enough. You gave everything you had, and you were about to give more than that. I realized that what I was asking, what I needed, wasn't worth your life. So I'm taking a different route. Legal protection, witness protection if necessary, whatever it takes. But I'm doing it legally, not by hiding behind someone who's killing himself to protect me." "There's still 1 more day," Jake said. 7 days, you said. "We're so close." "And you're in jail," Carolyn pointed out. "Victor won. Not the way he wanted, but he still won. He destroyed your ranch, your reputation, your freedom. I can't let him destroy anything more." Jake felt tears stinging his eyes, the exhaustion and pain and failure finally breaking through his defenses. "I promised," he said. "I promised to save you." "You did save me," Carolyn said. She reached across the table and took his zip-tied hands in hers. "You reminded me that there are good people in the world, that not everyone is like Victor, that I'm worth fighting for." "That's enough, Jake. That's more than enough." They released Jake 2 hours later, all charges dropped with apologies from the district attorney. Tommy was released too, sporting a black eye but grinning. The ranch was a mess when they got back. Furniture overturned from the search, fences cut, damage everywhere. But it was still standing, Carolyn stayed in protective custody while Rita and a team of lawyers dismantled Victor's lies piece by piece. It turned out that several other women had tried to file complaints against him over the years, all buried by his connections. With Caroline's case bringing attention, those women found their voices again. The case against Victor grew from domestic violence to abuse of power, from stalking to using law enforcement resources for personal vendettas. It would take months to unravel. But the tide had turned. Jake threw himself into rebuilding. Neighbors came to help repair the barn, replace the fence, round up the scattered cattle. Suppliers reinstated his credit once the fraud was exposed. Slowly, painfully, the ranch came back to life. He was working on the new barn roof 3 weeks later when a car pulled up the drive. Carolyn climbed out, wearing jeans and a simple shirt, her hair loose in the wind. She looked different, stronger, lighter, like something heavy had been lifted from her shoulders. "Thought you might need help," she said, shading her eyes to look up at him. Jake climbed down, his heart doing strange things in his chest. "I thought you'd be long gone by now. Witness protection, new identity, all that. Turns out I don't need witness protection." Victor's in jail, his connections are fleeing like rats from a sinking ship, and there are about 6 different agencies investigating him. He'll be locked up for years. Carolyn smiled. "So I'm free. Really free for the first time in a long time." "That's good," Jake said. "That's real good. There's just one problem," Carolyn continued. "I don't have anywhere to go. Lost my apartment when I ran, spent all my savings on lawyers and hiding. I'm basically starting from zero." "Rita could help you find work," Jake suggested, though part of him was already hoping for a different answer. "Actually, I was thinking I could work here. I grew up on a farm in Nebraska. I know my way around horses and cattle. And you need help, especially after everything that happened." Jake looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the broken, desperate woman who'd stumbled onto his ranch 5 weeks ago, but someone strong and capable and beautiful in ways that had nothing to do with her appearance. "I can't pay much," he said carefully. "And ranch work is hard? Early mornings, late nights, getting dirty and tired." "I know," Carolyn said. "I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'm not afraid of staying in one place anymore." "Not if it's the right place. Is this the right place?" Jake asked. Carolyn looked around at the ranch, at the mountains rising in the distance, at the cattle grazing in the pastures, at the house and barn and the endless Montana sky. Then she looked back at Jake, and her smile was like sunrise. "Yeah," she said. "I think it is." Winter came early that year, painting the ranch white and quiet. Carolyn moved into the small foreman's cottage that had been empty since Jake's grandfather died, though she spent most of her time in the main house anyway, cooking breakfast for the hands and sitting up late with Jake, talking about everything and nothing. She was good with the horses, patient and gentle. The ranch dogs followed her everywhere, sensing her kindness. Even the cattle seemed calmer around her. Jake caught himself watching her more than he should, the way she laughed when a calf butted against her legs, the concentration on her face when she mended tack, the quiet strength in everything she did. "You're staring again," Tommy said one afternoon, catching Jake gazing toward the paddock where Carolyn was working with a skittish Murray. "Just making sure she's doing okay," Jake deflected. "Uh-huh." Tommy grinned. "Boss, I've known you for 15 years. You never look at the new hands like that. She's not just a hand." "I know. That's what I'm saying." Tommy clapped him on the shoulder. "Maybe you should tell her that?" But Jake didn't know how. His mother's death had left scars that made intimacy hard, made him cautious about letting people close. He dated over the years, but nothing serious, nothing that lasted. The ranch had been his love, his focus, the thing that demanded all his energy and gave back just enough to keep him going. Carolyn was different, though. She understood the rhythms of ranch life because she'd lived them. She knew when to talk and when to work in comfortable silence. She never asked for special treatment or complained about the harsh conditions. And slowly, week by week, she was healing in ways Jake recognized because he'd tried to heal himself for years. Victor's trial was scheduled for spring. Carolyn would have to testify, face the man who terrorized her, tell her story to strangers. Jake could see her anxiety building as the date approached, even though she tried to hide it. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked one night. They were in the kitchen, Jake doing paperwork while Carolyn baked bread, something her grandmother had taught her, she said, and the smell always made her feel safe. "They'll believe you," Jake said. "All those other women are testifying too. The evidence is overwhelming. Victor's good at manipulating people. What if he manipulates the jury?" Jake set down his pen and walked to where she stood kneading dough, her hands white with flour. "Carolyn, look at me," she did, those green eyes full of worry. "You survived him," Jake said firmly. "You ran when most people would have stayed. You fought when it would have been easier to give up. You're the strongest person I know. Whatever happens in that courtroom, you'll survive it too. And I'll be right there with you. You'd come to the trial? Did you think I wouldn't?" Caroline's eyes welled with tears, but she was smiling. "I don't know what I did to deserve you in my life." "You asked for help," Jake said simply. "And you let someone help you. That's harder than people think." The bread rose, golden and perfect. They ate it with butter and honey, sitting at the old wooden table Jake's grandfather had built by hand. Outside, snow fell soft and steady, covering the world in white silence. Inside, something warm and gentle was growing between them. Something neither of them had quite named yet, but both recognized. Christmas came, and Jake's scattered family emerged from their various corners, a cousin from Billings, an aunt from Seattle, Tommy's extended family from the reservation. Carolyn fit in like she'd always belonged, telling stories and laughing, helping in the kitchen and playing with the children. Jake's Aunt Marie pulled him aside while Carolyn was distracted. "That woman's in love with you," she said bluntly. "And if you're too stubborn to see it, you're a fool." "I know," Jake admitted. "I just don't know if I'm good enough for her. After everything she's been through, she deserves someone better than a broken-down rancher." "Oh, honey." Marie patted his cheek the way she'd done when he was a boy. "You saved her life. You stood up to a monster when nobody else would. You gave her a home when she had nowhere to go. If that's not good enough, I don't know what is." The trial happened in March, when the snow was melting and the first shoots of grass were pushing through the mud. Jake sat in the courtroom behind Carolyn, close enough that she could feel his presence. Rita had assembled a team of prosecutors who dismantled Victor's defense with surgical precision. Victor looked smaller in his orange jumpsuit, stripped of his uniform and badge and authority. But he still tried, using his charm and his carefully constructed lies to paint himself as the victim. Jake watched Carolyn on the stand, speaking clearly and calmly about things that must have torn her apart inside, and felt a fierce pride. The other women testified, 5 of them, all with similar stories of control and violence and fear. The evidence mounted. Phone records showing Victor's obsessive calls and texts. GPS data from the device he'd planted on Caroline's car. Security footage from the hotel where he'd found her before she ran to Montana. The doctor's report about her injuries. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they came back, the verdict was guilty on all counts. Victor showed no emotion as they led him away, but he looked at Carolyn one last time. Not with love or regret, but with cold hatred. Jake moved instinctively, putting himself between them, and Victor's eyes shifted to him. "You think you've won?" Victor said quietly. "But you've just delayed the inevitable. I'll be out someday, and when I am, you'll be an old man with a record," Jake interrupted. "And she have moved on with her life." "You've already lost, Victor. You just don't know it yet." They walked out of the courthouse into spring sunshine. Carolyn took a deep breath, like she'd been holding it for months, then turned to Jake with tears streaming down her face. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "It's really over." "It's over," Jake confirmed. He wanted to hold her, to pull her close and never let go, but there were reporters and cameras and crowds. Instead, he just took her hand and they walked to his truck together. Rita joined them for dinner that night at the ranch, along with Tommy and some of the neighboring ranchers who'd stood by Jake during the worst of it. They celebrated with steaks and beer, telling stories and laughing, the tension of the past months finally draining away. Later, After everyone had gone, Jake found Carolyn on the porch, wrapped in a blanket and watching the stars. "Can't sleep?" he asked, joining her. Don't want to. I keep thinking I'll wake up and this will all be a dream, the trial, the verdict, all of it." "It's real," Jake assured her. "You're free." "I know. It's just—" She paused, searching for words. "For so long, my life was about running or hiding or surviving. Now I can actually think about living, about what I want, about the future. And what do you want?" Jake asked, his heart beating faster. Carolyn turned to look at him, and in the starlight her face was beautiful and open and unafraid. "I want to stay here, on this ranch, in this place. I want to wake up to these mountains and work with these animals and—" She took a breath. "And be with you, if you want that too." Jake had spent so many years alone, keeping people at arm's length, protecting himself from the pain of loss. But Carolyn had already seen him at his worst, exhausted, defeated, broken, and she'd stayed. She'd chosen him not because he was strong or heroic, but because underneath everything they understood each other. They'd both survived their own kinds of war and come out the other side. "I want that," he said. "I've wanted it for months. I just didn't know if you felt the same way." "How could you not know?" Carolyn laughed, leaning against him. "I've been following you around like a lost puppy, learning everything about ranching just to have an excuse to be near you. I thought you just liked the work." "I do like the work, but I love you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and true. Jake pulled her closer, feeling the rightness of it settle into his bones. "I love you too," he said. "Have since you first stumbled onto my land looking like something the wind blew in. Scared the hell out of me. Why? Because I knew if I let you in, everything would change. The ranch, my life, everything. And I was right, it did change. But it changed for the better." They sat like that for a long time, wrapped together against the cool spring night, not talking, just being. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. The cattle stirred in their pasture. The wind whispered through the new grass. All the sounds of the ranch Jake loved, made better because Carolyn was there to share them. The next morning, Jake woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. He found Carolyn in the kitchen, wearing one of his old flannel shirts over her jeans, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked up when he entered and smiled. "I made breakfast," she announced unnecessarily. "So I see. And I was thinking ... She poured him coffee, passing it over with a nervous energy that was new. "Maybe we should make this official. Not just me working here, but actually being part of the ranch. I have some money from the settlement Victor had to pay restitution to all of us. I could buy in, become a partner." Jake took a sip of coffee to buy himself time to think. Partnership meant legal entanglement, shared responsibility, putting Caroline's name on deeds and accounts. It meant commitment beyond just living together or dating. It meant building something permanent. "Or," he said carefully, "you could just marry me instead?" Carolyn nearly dropped the pan she was holding. "What? Marry me?" Jake repeated, setting down his coffee and crossing to where she stood frozen in surprise. "I know it's fast by most standards, but we've been through more in 6 months than most couples face in a lifetime. I know you, Carolyn, the good parts and the scared parts and the strong parts. And I want to spend the rest of my life with you, building this ranch and raising cattle and maybe—" He paused, suddenly vulnerable. "Maybe a family if you want that." "I want that," Carolyn whispered. "Jake, I want all of it. With you," he kissed her then, properly, the way he'd been wanting to for months. She tasted like coffee and hope, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like idiots. "I don't have a ring," Jake admitted. "Didn't exactly plan this proposal." "I don't need a ring. I need you. And this place and the life we'll build together." They did get rings eventually, simple bands from a jeweler in town who'd known Jake's family for generations. They got married in June, in a ceremony on the ranch with the mountains as their backdrop. Rita served as Caroline's maid of honor. Tommy walked her down the aisle since her own father was gone. The guest list was small but sincere neighbors, friends. The people who'd stood by them. Carolyn wore a simple white dress and boots, practical and beautiful. Jake wore his best suit, the one he saved for funerals and weddings, though it had been years since he'd worn it. When the justice of the peace pronounced them married, the assembled crowd cheered, and somewhere in the pasture, the cattle lowed their approval. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the justice said with a smile. "And I have to say, in 30 years of doing this, I've never seen two people more clearly meant for each other." The reception lasted into the evening, with food and music and dancing. Jake, who claimed he couldn't dance, let Carolyn pull him onto the makeshift floor and managed not to step on her feet too many times. They laughed and ate and celebrated with their community, the people who'd become their family. As the sun set and the party began to wind down, Jake and Carolyn slipped away to the house. They stood on the porch where she'd first asked him to save her, looking out at the land that belonged to both of them now. "You did it," Carolyn said softly. "You saved me. 3 times a day for 7 days, just like I asked. Even when it nearly killed you." "We saved each other," Jake corrected. "You reminded me what I was fighting for. Gave me a reason beyond just stubbornness to keep going. Still," she leaned her head on his shoulder, "you collapsed for me. You gave everything, and I'd do it again." Jake wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "Every time, every day, for the rest of our lives. That's what love is, Carolyn. It's standing up when you want to fall down. It's fighting when it would be easier to quit. It's saying I've got you and meaning it, no matter the cost." "Then I love you," Carolyn said, rising on her toes to kiss him. "And I've got you too. For all the mornings and noons and nights ahead." They went inside together, closing the door on the past and opening themselves to the future. Outside, the ranch settled into peaceful darkness. The cattle were safe in their pastures. The horses stood quiet in their stalls. The land that had witnessed violence and fear had been reclaimed by hope and healing, and in the house his grandfather built, Jake Rollins held his wife and felt, for the first time since he was a boy, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Not because he'd saved someone, but because he'd been brave, enough to let someone save him back. The ranch would face other challenges. There would be hard winters and dry summers, sick animals and broken equipment, all the struggles that came with working the land. But they would face those challenges together, as partners and equals, as two people who'd learned that the strongest foundation wasn't built on one person's strength, but on the courage to be vulnerable with each other. 3 times a day, Jake had stood between Carolyn and danger. But in the end, it wasn't the standing that mattered most. It was the falling into trust, into love, into a future neither of them had imagined, but both now couldn't live without. And that, more than any last stand confrontation or courtroom victory, was the real happy ending. Not because everything was perfect, but because they'd found something worth fighting for and someone worth being with through all the saves yet to come.